Hey there everyone, it's me, ARIS here, and today I'm going to be teaching you all a bit about my ideology, Constantism. You probably came to this video from being a Stage 1 learner in Constantism International, which currently operates primarily through Discord. This is because today we're going to be doing Stage 1 of my new Constantism course. Constantism, like many political opinions, is based on something we know as idealism. When I was younger, I myself was something called a utopian communist. I thought that everyone should be able to take whatever they would need and give what services or products they provide to anyone who would need them, as if everything were free. This is called collectivism because everything is owned by everyone collectively, as what we would call collective property, and can be borrowed when each person needs these things. Personal items, like your bed or your house, you would be able to reserve just for yourself. Instead of everyone having their own possessions and finances, we could all share them fairly, like a big happy family. Money wouldn't be necessary. I also believed that everyone should be able to suggest and vote on laws or plans for what to produce, so that decisions that have an effect on everybody would be made fairly. This is called direct democracy, and this would mean that nobody would have more say over the matter than any other person, and so nobody would have less power than other people, and therefore nobody would effectively be poor. Also, nobody would be discriminated against. I believed that because anyone would be able to use anything they needed, they'd have equal opportunities, and no discrimination or laws which promote the success of one group or class of people alone would be able to stop this. Nobody would be poor or powerless, so nobody wouldn't be able to afford anything, and therefore everybody would have equal possibilities in life of things that they could do. We call this idea of everyone having equal choices, opportunities, and possibilities egalitarianism, or sometimes just equality. Therefore, the kind of world I wanted we can call directly democratic egalitarian collectivism, but it also can be called communism. Yes, communism has meant different things to different people, but if a country has a dictator, then not everyone is equal, because the dictator can make decisions when others cannot, and so we can't call it true communism. But let's imagine we could go to that world and it would work perfectly right now. If everything worked like it sounds, would you like to live there? I know I would. If you say yes, then Constantism is here for you. The problem would remain, however, that in truth you can't simply make that world right away. There'd be people who wouldn't work, who'd take too much, people who'd find ways of reintroducing systems like money or ways of destroying this democracy. And there'd be people who'd want to pass discriminatory laws and other things which would mean communism would not continue. In fact, there have been some places in the past that have tried to create communism, but failed, or only have worked for a specific group of people, and not the whole world. Now a realist would ask, oh, well, that's not an option, so what's the next best world that we could create that's possible? But an idealist would ask, what is preventing us from getting the world we want? And how do we remove those things so that our communist world becomes possible? I founded Constantism to do just that, to find a way to allow our world to become communist in the future, as we would have always wanted. Now there'll probably be a few of you who say, but whatever you do, it's impossible, humans don't work that way. You'll learn in the next stage about why this is incorrect, that humans actually can and have worked in this way. There'll be others of you who say, why should we bother? The reason here is because in our present world, the world is allowed to be very unfair. Because there are things called social classes, as you'll learn in Stage 2, however hard the poorest people work, they can never reach the success of a super rich person, some of whom do barely anything. When they're poor and powerless, seeing as they're generally not in the government, they can't afford the same opportunities and standard of life as those rich people. Almost a half of everyone in the world is in poverty, and around 1 billion of those are children. Over 1 billion of people are in absolute poverty, meaning they can't afford necessary supplies to live. At the same time, the world we live in right now has so much competition between everyone in it that many people ignore big threats to life and produce unnecessary goods instead, often out of non-eco-friendly resources, harming the planet even more and not contributing to things humans have to fight against, like global warming, for example. If we don't start trying to change our world, the poorest people will continue to suffer and die, and we might all be wiped out by a massive environmental disaster. If we could eventually create egalitarianism, we would end poverty. And if we could eventually create collectivism, we would end the unnecessary competition that leaves us at risk of death from the state of the environment. So Constantists believe that we have to be idealistic and find a way to get to communism through Constantism, which you'll learn about in the next two stages, or else we could have more and more death and suffering. If you see where we're coming from on this issue, then please comment to be moved up to stage 2 before the stage 2 video comes out. If you disagreed with anything, or have any questions about the ideas in this video, comment those as well. I will make an FAQ video soon to answer these questions at a later date. Join the server and subscribe to keep updated, and I'll see you all around. Hey there everyone, it's me, ARIS here, and today I'm going to be teaching you all a little bit about my ideology, Constantism. You probably came to this video from being a Stage 2 learner in Constantism International, which currently operates primarily through Discord. This is because today we're going to be doing Stage 2 of my new Constantism course. As with all ideologies, Constantism has a relatively unique way of viewing the world and how it all works. Ever since humans first came about, human beings have always been organised into one of two structures, or as we say, social orders. In one of these, the choices, decisions, and actions a person takes can either make them gain power or lose power. Power can be in the form of money or political power, as well as the situation one is born into also affecting power. In this social order, we refer to power as a variable, but in the other, it's the opposite. In this other social order, whatever you do and whatever situation you're in, you won't lose or gain any power that would stop you from fulfilling opportunities or having various experiences. Everyone would have equal possibility, like I explained in stage 1. Power for each person would be at a constant, unchangeable level. For Constantists, whether or not power is a variable or a constant is the most important quality of any society in determining how societies and the people who live in them work. So whether or not a society has power as a constant or a variable is remembered at all times by Constantists when we look at and judge specific societies. When humans as we know them first emerged on Earth, it was very difficult for them because there were many dangers for them. Whilst there were plenty of resources that were there for the early humans to use and to live off, it was often difficult to harvest or gather these successfully. These early humans also had to compete with other animals, with environmental dangers, and other things. Because of these things, humans who were near each other all had to work together to make gathering resources and beating back dangers possible. As each were necessary for the group, what the humans gained from working together, they shared, to keep everyone in good condition and give everyone what they needed, as the more there were to help in the society, the better. Remember collectivism from stage 1? That was the mentality of the earliest humans, and there was also a degree of egalitarianism there also, so we can call this society a primitive communist one. As egalitarianism and collectivism together would have prevented anyone becoming richer or poorer within their collective, per se, whatever actions anyone did, no one would lose out, and their well-being, acting as an indicator of power, would have fallen into the constant category. However, this did not last, as eventually the early humans overcame their dangers and competition and expanded to the extent where the resources that were available to the early humans, partly due to them not having advanced enough technology to harvest or gather resources, were no longer there or no longer enough to sustain the lives of everyone together. Because humans no longer needed each other to survive, and if egalitarian collectivism was retained, they wouldn't gain enough to live comfortably, these collectives split. Collectivism was replaced by something we call individualism, where humans, or sometimes small collectives, families, looked after their own, and in doing so, competed with others for as much of the resources as possible, so that they would never be in danger of starving. But because of this, there were also those who were petered by the new rich humans, and so were left on the bottom of society with a lack of resources. This would become known as what we know as a hierarchy, and power here became variable, depending on how well one competed in the gathering of resources. People became dependent on constantly gaining power, and the individual ambition came into effect. Whilst this change in social orders had many disadvantages, it also at the time had many advantages, as competition encouraged people to work much more effectively, and therefore more technology could be made to help gather some of the resources that were previously unavailable. Also, at the beginning of this new social order, it wasn't necessarily an unfair idea, as the ones who were the best earned the most reward, as we would say, meritocracy. Yet, with this, meritocratic variablism was about to face many problems. The people who had, possibly rightfully, earned a large share of the resources due to meritocratic variablism originally, now had the ability, due to their individual ownership, to use these resources that they'd gained as they pleased. This meant that they could use the resources they'd earned to put them at an advantage for the future, and continue to gain more and more of the resources whilst not working necessarily quite as hard. Therefore, this was the second stage of variablism, distorted variablism. This made it even easier for the rich people to gain so much that they had more than they needed, whilst the poorest did not have what they needed. Because the poorest physically needed to gain some of the resources the richer people had to survive, this meant that the poor had to do exactly what the rich people told them to, so that the rich people would give them what they needed, or there was a possibility they could die. The rich people could now get the poor people to earn their resources and power for them, in exchange for a few essentials. This was effectively slavery, and it was exploitative variablism, a third stage of variablism. Both the rich people and the poor people were forced to be a part of this exploitation, as the individualism of variablism meant that the rich people were all in competition with one another, and if they didn't get the most power they possibly could, they could fall down the social hierarchy and lose some of the way of life that they had gained. The poor people, whilst they needed to be part of exploitation so as to receive the things they needed to survive, were actually losing power in this process, as power is relative in this society. So, as the power of the rich went up, the power of the poor people went down, due to an early version of inflation. Whilst the poor people were earning a little, the rich were earning a lot. The percentage of the product going to the poor became lower and lower, and effectively their power was lost. By this point, with exploitative variablism, all the meritocracy that now existed in variablism was gone. The idea that someone poor could, by working hard, eventually gain the power of a rich person, or as we call it, achieve social mobility, became impossible. Therefore, there became two distinct classes, the rich and the poor. Meritocratic variablism originally still existed within the confines of these classes, for example, between two rich people,
But they eventually fell into exploitative variablism too, in order to preserve their ways of life. So classes kept dividing all of the time, and meritocracy became less and less apparent. This was now the origin of things such as the feudal system, a hierarchy of different classes that it was very difficult to exit or rise out of. The most powerful families continued to exploit their people because they had learned instinctually that was what they needed to do to keep their way of life. They had learned that to survive in this society, all the way back from its meritocratic origins, they had to make sure they stayed as high in the social pecking order as possible, or they would begin to lose what they had gained. Gaining items was an example of this, as this wealth and status was relative, and their inventory had to expand at a faster rate than their competition, or else they might start to lose things because they'd fall on the social ladder. The poor competed to be at the favourable end of poverty instead of the less favourable end, and the rich did the same. Even though, for the rich, no longer had any threat to their needs, they kept going based on instincts that they had learnt, and the instincts that they had instilled in their children. More and more classes were formed, all playing their part somehow in exploitation. Feudalism was not to last forever, though. The people had seen that social mobility had become impossible, and meritocracy had been forgotten. So they aimed to re-establish it. They won, and then the same process began all over again. Capitalism was born on a similar premise to the origins of feudalism, meritocracy. By earning your contribution, everyone was pushed to do what they could, causing rapid technological advancement, such as in industrialization. In order to try and avoid exploitation, many capitalist societies started to use representative democracy so that political power would allow social mobility in the political hierarchy in the future. But in their efforts to do this, their variablist instincts prompted another power variable to rise: monetary power. Money became the main hierarchy, and classes formed based around it. Money was originally earned meritocratically, but as with any other variable, it descended into exploitative variablism. The problems of variablism were not solved, but reset, and left to do the exact same thing that had happened in feudalism. We can see evidence of this happening now, with social mobility becoming more and more limited, and more classes constantly being created in capitalism. The lowest class, the extreme impoverished, which we already talked about in stage 1, already are victims of exploitative variablism, and we can see the highest class coming to control more and more of what we need to survive, which will eventually put everyone into exploitation eventually as well. According to Marxists, it is inevitable that the working class or proletariat would overthrow the exploitative upper class or bourgeoisie, just as the bourgeoisie usurped the feudal aristocracy in the capitalist revolution. The proletariat would form a socialist society, according to Marx, which Marx said would eventually rise into communism. However, this analysis Constantists believe is flawed because changing the society from feudalistic to capitalist didn't filter a class out permanently, it just reset the same system, and new classes are continuing to emerge, as discussed. When Marx's proletariat finally gained the power to overthrow the bourgeoisie, if they were to do so, they would no longer be the lowest class, as the system would only reset for socialism as it did for capitalism, inevitably falling into exploitative variablism, with the issues of capitalism continuing to a large degree. This is part of the reason why orthodox Marxism and orthodox Marxist progression will never probably materialize in the way it was predicted by Marx. It did occur, however, in a rushed, distorted form, Leninism. However, this was an opportunistic movement to bring about the socialist society before there was no further chance, instead of it being an inevitability. In this society, the bourgeoisie had to be suppressed, and redistribution had to be forced in order for it to be done at all. Yet even so, the rushed revolution had not developed enough to have resources for everyone's needs, and therefore variable power had to continue in the form of political power to make sure that redistribution continued. This necessity for variabilism could obviously not manifest itself monetarily, so political power, as it had been in feudalism, became the variable for a socialist society. Therefore, there were still requirements for individualism and the pursuit of status, so as to avoid the problems of the powerless. Great political rivalries and divisions formed, and abuses of power still existed. In truth, class system also emerged, the vanguard acting as the highest class. The issues of Leninism had notable similarities with the issues of capitalism and feudalism, for they were all variablist societies. In all tried variablist social orders, these things happen. For example, they all have some tie to meritocracy at the beginning. Socialism may be less so, but certainly in terms of vanguard and party leadership. They all allow, at first, power to be lost and gained according to the actions of the individual or the small collective unit. They all prompt people into individualism. They all allow those at the top to consolidate their place in the social order, be it hereditarily or during one's life. They all allow serious consequences and losses for those at the bottom of society. They all continuously create classes and decrease social mobility as time advances. They all artificially push production through intra-species competition. Among many other similarities, society's problems that did not necessarily pose a problem themselves in the primitive era, are linked to each of the three: capitalism, feudalism, and socialism. And every revolution out of one has only led to a restart of this meritocratic variablism, later becoming exploitative classification. No revolution has ever fixed this issue. Meritocracy is just not stable. The ideals of it, on paper, seem fair and good, but unless a revolution were to occur after every single transaction, which would be hugely unstable and practically impossible, meritocracy cannot be sustained. We need to find another way, so it's time to go back to the themes I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Variablism brought many problems, but it was necessary at the time and inevitable due to a shortage of resources. But in recent years, we've begun to see the rise of consumerism and overproduction becoming a large problem for humanity. For example, 1/3 of all produced food is wasted, and the sheer amount of unnecessary consumer goods manufactured is massive. It is evident now that humans have enough resources and manpower to provide necessities for over the number of people alive today. If we were to find a way back to Constantism, where power is at a constant for everyone, and take our technologies with us, humans would no longer need to be individualistic, and egalitarian collectivism could continue and work. Constantists, therefore, aim to find a way that we can change the social order for the future and free ourselves from the vicious cycle of variablism. You'll learn just how we aim to constantize society in stage 3. If you see where we're coming from on this issue, then please comment to be moved up to stage 3 before the stage 3 video comes out. If you disagreed with anything or have any questions about the ideas in this video, comment those too. I will make an FAQ video soon to answer these questions at a later date. Join the server and subscribe to keep updated, and I'll see you all around. Goodbye.
Hey there everyone, it's me, ARIS here, and today I'm going to be teaching you all a little bit about my ideology, Constantism. You probably came to this video from being a stage 3 learner in Constantism International, which currently operates primarily through Discord.
This is because today we're going to be doing stage 3 of my new Constantism course. Constantists believe that if we want to achieve directly democratic egalitarian collectivism, we have to return to a Constantist environment to stimulate the necessary instincts and mentality for this society to work. For example, as we've discussed, it is necessary for people in the Variablist social order to be individualistic as opposed to collectivist. And we've seen this, for example, in communes that have been established in Marxist transitional socialist regimes, such as in China. And we've seen that these mentalities are not going to spontaneously change for everyone, seeing as, for example, many of these communes had a corrupt and therefore variablistic structure. So these efforts were obviously lacking in something in trying to change society. Utopian communes had similar issues on many occasions, such as with Jonestown, where egalitarianism was not sustained. Of course, other communes were more successful, Catalonia being a widely used example, but ultimately it was a society full of willing and trying anarchists. Anarcho-communism is simply not compatible with every single person in the world, seeing as these people have been raised in an environment which trains their instincts to suit variablism, as this is the natural human reception to the environment which they become accustomed to. Therefore, it's necessary to be more thorough and make sure that the instincts of the generation are and compatible with egalitarian collectivism to ensure that the communism once created does not just simply crumble into variablist, individualist instinct, as we believe anarcho-communism probably would do if it was on a worldwide scale. So in order to be thorough, we must make sure that the instincts are developed to suit Constantism and not variablism, to be collectivist and egalitarian and not individualist or with social class. The social order is defined by its inhabitants as well as its conditions, and so even whilst we've seen some who have been willing to suppress their variablist instincts, for example in Catalonia or in other places, this practically cannot happen on a whole world scale, as someone would slip up, and with only a tiny incident like that, variablism would rise again. And unfortunately, that's the sad truth. The way we as humans have developed is to be individualistic so as to best profit from the variablist conditions we are in. And it's very difficult for us to change this instinct, for it is largely subconscious. Therefore, most of us, as people hardwired into variablism, must be kept away from those who we aim to develop Constantist instincts in, from a few exceptions, so that there is little to no chance of us contaminating or corrupting their environment into one that would require individualist and variablist instinct. So as hardwired variablists, we unfortunately have to stay in variablism, but this doesn't mean our society can't support a Constantization process. The whole process and initiation must be done via a party that would turn governed agenda towards allowing Constantization. In each stable democratic nation of the world, Constantists would have a political party or an organisation, Constantism Great Britain, Constantism Austria, Constantism Norway, and so forth. These parties would focus on promoting and spreading the Constantist message by organising, campaigning, debating, and so forth. Raising awareness and convincing people of our message is the first and most important stage. These parties would coordinate their actions by being part of an international alliance, Constantism International. Once the message would be spread to as many people as possible, and this might take a generation or longer, these parties would start to stand for elections. Whilst hopefully by this point the majority of the populace would be aware of what a Constantization program would look like and would be aware of the long-term goal we're trying to achieve and be aware of all the benefits to people of every social class that Constantism would provide. The parties would aim to appease the existing members of society and create a society for which the specific country and which would be most likely to generate votes. As Constantization must not and would not affect most of these people directly, This would not necessarily provoke much backlash against Constantization from the bourgeoisie, for example, as it would not jeopardize their own personal business or affairs. Instead, Constantization would hopefully be presented by each party, and rightfully so, as beneficial for those of all classes, as it would help save society from extra-species threats, would help expression and freedom from market forces prevail, especially in terms of things such as love or work, which would not be warped by financial obligation anymore. In many countries, the best way to generate votes would be probably to adopt a social democratic platform, to appease both business, yet also provide benefits for the working class. Such methods have been proven to be very popular in countries such as the UK, where Clement Attlee's social democratic government is widely regarded as very successful. In other countries, with a more rebellious and agitated and a proletariat, however, a more socialist society would probably be the most preferable option to the majority of the population. However, ultimately, it does not matter what social system is put forward for this society, which we call the common government, so long as it allows the Constantist party to continue getting into government and ensuring that the continuation of Constantization remains in the background. For other countries where democracy is impaired, the only way this could come about is through a revolution, for which a more socialistic society would have to be advocated in order to attract specific groups of people to pro-Constantist motives. Entryism into revolutionary movements and parties would also be necessary in many instances. It would be preferable if a common government could be founded democratically before dealing with undemocratic states, so as to provide a little more support from this nation, the Constantist International. It is also quintessential that in these common governments, immigration and emigration is as easy as possible, so as to promote Constantist internationalization and allow many people to come in and contribute to the Constantization process as possible. Policies with countries outside of the international, however, would be determined on the basis of what would earn votes. Alongside appealing to the public, the aim of all of these governments is to run Constantization programs and protect these with all of their power. If in need, the international would take any donations from each common government to aid each Constantization project, which would take place in something we call a Yavashat, which each common government would have. These Yavashats would be supplied with any necessary resources and volunteers by the international to help create conditions of plenty for those living there, alongside other conditions that would provoke Constantist instincts instead of Variablist ones, including direct democracy, egalitarianism, which includes social justice, and collectivism. These conditions we sometimes refer to as Yavasha. One such condition would also have to be full independence and removal from its common government, or any other independent society or variablist society, in order to stop the variablist aspect infiltrating this society and prompting variablist instincts in those who would be educated there. Similarly, direct democracy would have to be brought about in the form of something such as e-democracy, which would have an open town hall model of making decisions, choosing production and distributing, as well as passing regulation and law, and structuring the app in a way to prioritize the interests and the location of each person, as well as allowing anyone to delegate their vote to someone they believe to be qualified to make the decision. Everyone in the Yavashat would have the opportunity to propose plans and vote whether to enact these plans or not. So decisions concerning the collective would be made and carried through by the collective. However, these Yavashats would start off with minuscule numbers of volunteers to guarantee that each was completely not corrupt and ready and capable of hiding their variablist instincts so as not to bring down each Yavashat and turn it into a variablist society rife with individualism. Whilst these volunteers would have to produce and provide good conditions for all in the Yavashat, Some would also play a part in the mutual education process, one of the main objectives of the Yavashat, and a process that would drive Constantization. These particular volunteers would be provided with children, at first orphans and children without a stable life, at a very young age, before they begin to comprehend societal structure. The children would be taken to live in the Yavashat, and therefore have their instincts tailored to the Constantist social order that would be in place there. And this would be guided by the volunteers, who would be naturally trusted party members as mentors to help teach these children about how to make best use of this Constantist society, as well as give a thorough and comprehensive education, including political education, to reduce potential for apathy. After these children have gained the necessary knowledge, responsibility, and experience, they then go on to give back to the Yavashat, of which they are a part, by becoming mentors for future children coming into the Yavashat. Eventually, as the number of available mentors raised in the Yavashat increases, new children would have to be taken as well from willing donors from the common government, and as time increases, eventually all children being born into the common government would be sent to the Yavashat. However long this takes is not set in stone, depending on how long each Yavashat child must be mentored for, and how many children each mentor can take. As the Yavashat would grow in number, it would grow in size at the same time, and eventually, far in the future, the Yavashat would be able to accommodate all the children who otherwise would have been born into a specific common government. And so eventually, once all of the older, non-Yavashat generations die off from old age, the Yavashat can take the entire area of this old common, and the former country would have finally evolved into a Constantist society of directly democratic egalitarian collectivism. Eventually, as the world goes Constantist, the construction of nationality would also dissipate. The world and the human race united for the interests of all. During the mutual education process, children of different identity backgrounds would be integrated with one another in the Yavashat to help settle racial conflict, scapegoating, and hatred from the basis of unfamiliarity. With complete freedom of movement in a Constantist society, people would come and go from different areas of the world until a good equal balance of people in each place would be achieved. As for work in the Yavashat, the workforce would be made up of volunteers, as well as donations from common governments. But once the amount of mentors reaches a sufficient level, some of these children can be educated to have the skill level necessary to make a contribution to the Yavashat in whichever way they can professionally. Jobs that they would do would be chosen based on choice primarily, and where there would be a lack of people of certain professions, the contribution to the collective would be seen as greater, and therefore the prestige attached to these jobs would increase based on the fact that they would not be being done. Ultimately, this common government and Yavashat societal model would be enshrined in constitutions which would be written for each common government, guaranteeing Yavasha for each Yavashat, making it as difficult as possible to remove this constitution and social structure, whilst also guaranteeing democracy, human rights for everyone in the common government, and so on and so forth. Through these means, we would transform the social order in which we live, slowly yet surely, from Variablist to Constantist. In doing so, this would finally allow us to gain the directly democratic egalitarian collectivist society that we need to solve the issues of the world. It isn't necessarily a pretty process, but this Constantization we view to be necessary for human survival, so it's best to start as soon as possible, be as thorough as possible, and make as much change as possible. If you see where we're coming from on this issue, then please comment to be made an official member of the Constantist movement. If you disagreed with anything, or have any questions about the ideas in this video, comment that too. I will make an FAQ video soon to answer these questions at a later date. Join the server and subscribe to keep updated, and I'll see you all around.